All right, good morning. Happy Groundhog Day. Groundhog's already been up this morning. Puxtony Phil. And do you know what he did? He saw his shadow. And he's missed it for the last 2 years. Let's just be clear about that. And do you know that last year a lawyer in Ohio actually presented a fake lawsuit against him because he had missed it so badly? Anyway, that's a whole other issue. You can go look that up online. Yeah, so supposedly there's going to be more winter. And it's been a crazy winter here anyway, so whatever. Super Bowl's today. Anybody care? Seattle? Anybody? Denver? Anybody? Yeah, okay. We're kind of on the wrong side of the country, you know. It's like all those people out there are worried about that, yeah. Or how about just like nachos and brownies? Who's for that? I mean, isn't that the whole point of the Super Bowl anyway? It's just an excuse to make food that you don't normally eat, and that's kind of how that works. So, all right, well, it's going to be good. Just want to reiterate what Jill said earlier about celebration dinner. It's going to be a great night. It's an important night for us, a time that we get to not only look back on what God has done here, but also that we get to look forward at what God is calling us to do in not only this next year, but in the next several years. So you're going to want to be here. Again, that's February 12th and 13th. Sign up online, and that'll be a great night. Okay, this morning we're going to continue in the message series that we've been in called By Faith. Just looking at this whole issue of our faith. What does it mean for us to live by faith? How have others before us done this, and how are they affecting us today by the lives that they lived? And so in this Hebrews chapter 11 that we're looking through, the writer goes through and lists all of the testimonies of people all the way back in the Old Testament who had a significant faith with God, and brings those out to kind of show us what this looks like, to give us a model of what genuine faith is. And so last week we looked at the life of Enoch, and we looked at the idea of him walking with God for a very long time. And it was by faith that he walked with God, but because of his walk with God, his faith was strengthened. And so we kind of learned that this walking with God is something very important even for us today, to have this regular relationship with him. And so this morning, we're going to go on to the next story, which is about his great-grandson, Noah. And Noah's story of his relationship with God is somewhat similar in that he also walked with God, and because of that, it mattered to his faith. And so I realize that probably most of us at least have a basic knowledge of the story of Noah and the flood. So I get that, but let me just kind of give you the Cliff Notes version of that really quick before we get into what Hebrews says about Noah. So we remember that in the days of Noah, wickedness basically was reigning in that day. People had given their hearts over to evil. They only lived to satisfy themselves. They had essentially rejected God, except for one person, Noah. Noah was considered a righteous man living in an evil world. But because of what God saw, the depth of depravity in the hearts of people and the evil that was happening there, and I suppose he didn't see any hope, he decided that he was going to wipe out the earth. Now, there are lots of questions with that right there that I'm not even going to get into this morning, and I want to ask God about that one day when I get there. But this is how this went. But God found Noah to be righteous, and he said, Noah, you're my guy. And he came to Noah, and he said, Noah, here's the deal. And he explained to him about the world, and he explained to him that he was going to destroy the world by a flood. And that he wanted to preserve Noah and his family and the animals and start over. And so he said, Noah, I need you to do something for me. I need you to build a boat, a really big boat. And I need you to build it to these exact specifications. And you can go back to Genesis 6 and read that. And really, I encourage you to go back and read this, the account of Noah and the flood. But he gives him all of these very specific instructions on how to build this boat. And at the end of all of that, Noah spends a long time building this boat, and it says that basically Noah did everything that the Lord asked of him. In other words, he built it just the way that God had commanded him. So then Noah and the animals and his family, they get in the boat, God seals up the boat, and he sends a flood, causes the waters of the deep and the mist over the earth to crash down and create a great flood that lasts 40 days and 40 nights. At the end of that time, the rains recede, the flood waters go down, Noah and the boat are left. they get out, they build an altar, they worship the Lord. God at that point makes a covenant with Noah and says, Noah, I will never do this again. And he symbolizes that how? Rainbow. That's right. Symbolizes that with a rainbow. Every time we see that rainbow today, we're reminded of this covenant that God had made so long ago. And so, essentially and generally, that is the story of Noah and the flood. And you know, I have to say, and wouldn't you agree with me that this has got to be one of the greatest challenges of faith that we could ever read? That God comes to a guy who lives in a desert wilderness and says, I need you to build a 20,000-ton ship, is what he was building. He didn't know it was 20,000 tons, but that's what it was. And it's based on something that's going to happen that he's never heard of before. And can't you imagine Noah's thoughts and questions that were going through his mind when he thought about that? And I would say that one of the greatest acts of faith is when Noah picked up the axe and cut down that first tree. As he began to do what the Lord had called him to do, having no idea what this was all about. Now, this is why the writer of Hebrews picks up on Noah's life and talks about it here in chapter 11, verse 7. Because he saw, as he did in Enoch, something in Noah that we needed to know about, something imitatable, something that we could emulate our life after. So here's what the writer of Hebrews says about Noah and his life and faith. He says, by faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear, built an ark to save his family. By his faith, he condemned the world and became heir of the righteousness that is in keeping with faith. So the writer kind of sums up Noah's whole deal in just a few words, really, in my opinion. But essentially, he comes up with three things that I think are very important for us to look at today as we see how Noah actually carried this out. So I just want to run through those. Essentially, by faith, Noah, first of all, moved out of a reverence for God. It's called holy fear in the Bible. But he moved out of a reverence for God. It says that God warned Noah of a coming flood of things not yet seen. Let's think about that for just a minute. First of all, it's quite possible that Noah had never seen rain and certainly never seen a flood. So when God was talking to him about this, he probably had no idea. Back in that day, in the days of Noah, the earth was watered essentially by a huge mist. You know, that was like part of the atmosphere in that day that rained down on the earth and kept it moist all the time. But there wasn't anything like rain like we have today. Here's a little side note for you. Some experts and scientists would say that there's a reason why people lived for so long before the flood happened, because of this mist that was around the earth. It kept the harmful rays from the sun from getting to people, and the rays of the sun often cause people, it's what reduces our life. And so because before that, the rays of the sun, those harmful ones, weren't getting to people, they lived for a very long time. After the flood, after the mist was gone, is when people's lives began to shorten, and that's how we get to where we are today. Anyway, that's just a little side note for you. Now, another thing is, Noah certainly had never built a boat, and it's even quite possible, based on where he lived, he had never seen a boat. So when God comes to him and says, I want you to build a boat, and why do we have such exact specifications? Because God knew Noah doesn't really even know what I'm talking about. So there's that. But not only that, think about what was beyond this. As he begins to build it, how's he going to answer the questions of people in his community? How's he going to deal with people coming to you and going, hey, Noah, what you doing? I'm building a boat. Somebody call somebody, because this guy's nuts, you know. I mean, how would he deal with that in the community, not having any idea of what that meant for he and his family? He had no clue what was about to happen to him. But what he did know is he knew God. And it says that he had a holy fear for God. That had been developed over time. And you know, we see that word fear, and it kind of shows up throughout the Bible, this idea of having a fear for God. But the Greek word for fear actually means to have a reverence for God, or to reverence him. To like have this great respect for him. And this is what Noah had as a result of his relationship. And I think about this fear, respect idea, kind of like we are taught when we grow up, right? We're taught to respect our elders, people older than us, people in different roles than we are. Teachers, I think about just growing up, teachers and coaches and my parents and anybody who's older than me sort of held this place of authority and respect in my life. But it's not a respect that, like, my parents were like, you need to fear them because they might hurt you. That was not it. It was just because of the role that they held, because they were older and wiser, that I had a respect or reverence for them. And in the same way, Noah had this relationship with God that warranted this kind of a reverence for him. And when you go back into the Bible, you see different instances of it that help us out. Like back into Exodus, as the Israelites had passed through the waters of the Red Sea, and the Egyptians were left in that dead. It says in verse 31 of Exodus 14, and when the Israelites saw the mighty hand of the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses his servant. And so basically what they were doing was they were saying, look, we see this God who is so powerful and so mighty. And if he's capable of doing that with the Egyptians and saving us, we fear him, revere him, respect him in such a way that, and then it says it, that we will put our trust in this God. We will give him our life. We believe that he can do all things and that he can handle us. In Proverbs 3:7 it says, do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. Understand that his wisdom is so much greater than anything that we have here. So give your heart to him and don't pay attention to this evil in the world. Psalms 128:1 says, blessed are all who fear the Lord, who walk in obedience to him. Those who genuinely give their life to him and trust him. And you know, in another sense, I take this in this way. Don't treat the Lord lightly or flippantly. And you know, no matter how close we get to him, as we do that throughout our walk with him, we are reminded that we are the creation and he is the creator. You know, he is our heavenly Father, that at the end, he holds all the cards. He's the one who has our purpose in life in mind. And so we respect him for that. But not only that, but we respect him because he loves us. He has the power to take care of us, to save us, to give us a life worth living. That's why we would have a holy fear of him or respect for him, as Noah did. But then also, as a result of this kind of a relationship, Noah acted in obedience. There's that word again, obedience. That word that sometimes has a lot of negative baggage with it when we have to think about being obedient. And yet it's so different when we talk about how we relate to God out of this place of obedience with him. Noah, you see, walked with God so closely that by the time that God came to him, after like 500 years of living, and said, Noah, I need you to build a boat, Noah trusted him and was willing to obey him. Even though he didn't know what all that meant, it was like, but I just know you, God, and I'm willing to do this. And so he dropped everything he was doing. And we think for the next, although experts would say it's either 75 or 100 years, he spent that time focused doing nothing but working on this project that God had given him because of something that was going to happen that he had never seen before in a place where there was no ocean. It was a desert. Yet he gave his life and work wholly to the Lord and obeyed what he'd asked him to do. And you know, I think so much about this faith that Noah had, how amazing it must have been. And really, when God comes to us and he asks us to do things, or we read his word and we know that our life should line up this way, it's like obedience shouldn't be hard, it should be natural. It should be a natural outgrowth of this love that God has put in our heart. And when that happens, we will see him work in our life. Um, Several years ago, I think you've heard me talk about Becky and I's trip to China. That was just so very impactful on Becky and I both, but just I refer back to that so much because of what we saw, the stories that we heard, the people that we talked to, the people of such incredible faith. But I think specifically about a story that we heard about, a true story, about these two young Christian girls that were sisters who had been called to leave their home in the, I don't even know how to pronounce it, Henan province of China, to move out to western China, to a very remote area, and to take the gospel out there. And this was to reach a group of Mongolians, some ethnic minorities there. The gospel had never been shared there. So this was like a major risk that they were taking. So they leave with no financial support, no ticket to get back home, no connections or contacts when they get there. So literally, it's just like we heard God call and we're just going to go. And so they took what little resources they had and they go out to western China. When they get to this town, they begin to share the gospel and nobody accepts it. Nobody wants to hear about it. And the more they try to break in, and especially they tried to reach the ladies in the town. And the ladies just outright had nothing to do with them. And they assumed that they would stay in the homes of the people there. But nobody would have them. So for weeks on end, they kept trying to just earn the respect of the people, living wherever they could, until finally they realized they're going to have to find some sort of a permanent place, but where would they go? And one day they heard about a cave that was on the outskirts of town, a cave that nobody would go to because they kind of had this belief that it was taboo or that there was an evil spirit that lived there or something. But the girls had no option. So they go out to this cave and still thinking about evil spirits in the cave, and so they kind of like put their hands on it and said, God, please bless this cave for whatever may be in here. And they decided this is where we're going to live. And so they made that sort of home base, and during the day they would go into town and do their best to try to reach people, and then at night they would go and they would stay in this cave. So this goes on for quite a while. And after several months of this, actually, they begin to get very discouraged. They're running out of food. They're running out of resources. Nobody's paying any attention. And they're beginning to wonder, was it just a mistake? Did we not hear God clearly? And then something interesting happens. Outside the cave, all of a sudden, these mushrooms start springing up. Mushrooms they'd never seen before. Edible mushrooms. They start eating the mushrooms. The mushrooms are enough to sustain them between whenever they could get a bigger meal, that they realized, I think we're going to be okay. Let's not give up. Maybe this is a gift from God. And so they decided to rethink how they were approaching the people. They decided they would go in and they would just start serving them. They would just start doing acts of kindness in any way they possibly could. And quit talking about even the gospel and just show acts of kindness and see what happens. So that's what they started doing. Well, that worked. People started inviting them in. People started having conversations with them. Ladies began to sort of, the barriers went down. Eventually, they would actually become accepted in this town. And then a year after they got there, finally, one lady accepts Christ. But because of this one lady, another one accepts Christ, and another one, and another one. Let me tighten this up. Eventually, there become more Christians in this town than non-Christians because of the influence of these girls in this community. Also, finally, one of the girls gets a job in a restaurant washing dishes. And so now they're able to sustain themselves. They decide to stay there. Because of their influence, because of these people coming to Christ, all of a sudden they'd found a home. They actually would begin to take people out to the cave. Even though they eventually lived in the town, they would take people out to the cave and do Bible training sessions with them out there and tell the story of what God had done in them while they were at this cave. This was in the late 1980s. Now hundreds and hundreds of people have come to know the Lord in this town because of those two girls, young girls who were willing to go and do what they did. And here's an interesting note. The day that one of the sisters got the job at the restaurant, the mushrooms shriveled up and died. we didn't need those anymore. Now, will God take care of you if he sends you? Is God going to be with you wherever he takes you? Absolutely. And I'm reminded of that definition of faithfulness, long obedience in the same direction. Long obedience in the same direction. And you know, this was Noah's life. Lord, I have given myself to you. I trust you, and therefore I will obey you for as long as it takes. And I believe you are with me and that you'll care for me. In Deuteronomy 8:6, it says, observe the commands of the Lord your God, walking in obedience to him and revering him. I think this is true for you and I. When we find ourselves walking in obedience with him, I think that's where we begin to find real life starting to happen. And we begin to see God doing things that we've never seen him do before. All right, then this last thing. Noah's life and his faith defined righteousness in that day. Righteousness is just basically a right standing with God, a right way of living in this world. And Noah had that righteous life, and righteousness was shining through him. But it says it this way in Hebrews. It says, by faith he condemned the world. In other words, Noah's life condemned the world. And let me put it a different way. The Message version says it like this. His act of faith drew a sharp line between the evil of the unbelieving world and the rightness of the believing world. His life lived in such stark contrast and was such a bright and shining light in the midst of all of the just rampant evil in that world that in a way it was like his life was sort of condemning the world. Not like he was pointing his finger and condemning people, but it just naturally was because it was so different. And I think about, there's a preacher named Charles Spurgeon, and he said this, talking about how we live a holy life and how that it is so different. He said, I've heard it said that if there is a crooked stick and you want to show how crooked it is, you need not waste words in description, just place a straight one by the side of it and the thing is done directly. And I love that. It's like, okay, there's this crooked stick, but if it just sits in a pile of crooked sticks, it's not very different. It just looks like everything else. But if you take a straight stick and you hold it up against it, you go, hey, wait a minute, there's something different. It looks crooked now. It looks different. And it's kind of like Noah's life was a straight stick that was so apparently different from all the crooked sticks that were out there, you know? And that his life defined what righteousness was, what it meant to genuinely be right with God and right before him and to love him. And his life was very different than that of the unbelieving world. And when we live that life, it shows up very differently. And Paul said in Romans 12, he kind of said it in a different way, but he said, look, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Let the good that is in you always rise up. Because your good always overcomes the evil that's in this world. It's so different. How are we doing? How about you and me? Do we see ourselves in this very same way? I'm living out of this walk with God, this obedience, this sense of, I don't know, I'm this straight stick living in this world. You know, as I go out and as I deal with tough things and I go to work and those people are so evil, or I go home and it's so difficult, or I go here, I go there, you know, my friends, they're always pressing in on me and sometimes I just want to give up. It's so hard to live this life. I mean, God is calling us to this place of faithfulness. And he's like, I promise you there's a good end to this. A very good end for you. Fruit will be born out of your life in ways that you can't possibly imagine, but you've got to trust me. I'm going to leave you with this quote that I read in a commentary this week. It says, Noah's life illustrates the life and the walk and the work of faith in every way. He is a model of a man of faith. God needs more men and women like Noah. God, help me to be like him, to really believe God, to really obey God, no matter how bizarre or how strange or how difficult or how out of my routine the command might be. God, help me to obey. I want my faith to be that which establishes me in the sight of God as righteous. I think that's good. I want that too. Let's pray. Well, God, this world is not much different than the world that Noah lived in so long ago. For the most part, it's a place where people have given in to that darkness, to that evil that's in this place. And yet you have called us to be different, to be separate, to live a holy life, a righteous life. And that's not always easy. And it feels like, God, sometimes it takes a long time to do this. But this morning we're thankful for Noah and his story. And we remember he was not a preacher, he was not a prophet, he was just a man who'd given his heart to you fully. And his faithfulness was evident. His obedience was evident. And God, we all want to be like that. I think deep in all of our hearts, we want to have that kind of faith that helps us step out every day and just say, God, what do you want? What do you want me to do? And Lord, I pray that we would all have that kind of courage, that kind of strength. That when we ask that question of you, that you would tell us and we would step out boldly. Out of love for you and out of our reverence for you, that we trust you, that you will take care of us no matter where you lead us or where you take us, God, that you've already gone ahead of us and said, it's okay, come follow. So God, just thank you that you are with us. That you don't call us to do anything that we can't possibly handle with you. So God, this morning we just want to worship you, put you at the highest place in our lives individually, together corporately this morning, just to say that we love you. Thank you for so many ways that you've shown up in our lives already.